Well, yes, that's what they tell me.
All right, so I believe Commissioner Parks is in attendance at the chambers. Let me let my staff know to unmute over there.
All right, good evening. I am Vice Chair John Dolan. I am going to be sitting in as chair of this meeting until Chair McCoy can join us. She's running a little bit late this morning. So I now call this meeting of the Parks, Recreation, and Arts Commission to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Parks?
Here.
Commissioner Barraza? Commissioner Singh?
Here.
Commissioner Cummings?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Apuda?
Here.
Commissioner Vane?
Here.
And Chair Dolan, Vice Chair.
Present. Okay. So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. And begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Secretary, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are. Actually, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get you guys a copy of your minutes for October 18th and October 25th. We were having some technical difficulties, which didn't allow me to print them out. And so I will be asking to continue these again to the next meeting.
Okay. Any other proposed changes to the agenda? In which case, is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
Motion, Meyer.
That's Commissioner Vang,
I'll second it. Cummings.
Commissioner Cummings.
Okay.
Okay, Secretary, please conduct a roll call vote.
And I'd like to note that Commissioner Barraza has joined the meeting. Commissioner Parks?
Yes.
Commissioner Barraza? Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Vane?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Dolan.
Yes.
So we will be
You
continuing
didn't call my
the
name,
minutes.
Brianna.
Oh, I apologize, Commissioner Apuda.
Yes.
Thank you.
And as just noted, we will continue approval of the minutes until they are submitted. So in which case we will go directly to the subcommittee reports. Does the Cultural Arts Subcommittee have an update that it would like to provide the Commission?
The only updates that I have is Lilia Chavez over at Fresno Arts Council. She will be posting the RFP out tomorrow. She was waiting for the city to provide her the attachment to go with it, and it seemed like it was emailed to her this afternoon. And I just want to thank Commissioner Parks for following up with um, LD and everyone else. So that's all I have for today.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Bang.
You're welcome.
Does the Highest Needs Neighborhood Subcommittee have an update that it would like to provide to this commission?
I do not believe we do, but if Dr. Apuda has anything she wants to say.
I believe that the work that WRT is going to present today will serve as an update for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh and Commissioner Apuda. And does the Parks Master Plan Subcommittee have an update that it would like to provide to the commission?
This is Commissioner Cummings, and I don't believe that we have an update for this week. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So we will now go to member reports and comments. And I'll just go through a list here, Commissioner, and I'm going off of my screen, so this will not be in any apparent order. Commissioner Barraza, do you have any reports or comments? You're muted, sir. Commissioner Barraza, you're muted. There we go.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask city staff that at the appropriate time, they could give us an update of what action the city council took on the recommendation presented. And I know that our chair, Kimberly McCoy, was supposed to have made a presentation, and I just want to know what happened. Sometimes we get busy with other things, and if city staff could at the appropriate time give us an update.
Hi, everyone. I made it to the meeting. I had an emergency dentist appointment. I had to get a tooth extracted. But they moved it to this city council's meeting this Thursday. So I was there in person, Commissioner Barraza, but that item got moved to the next meeting, which will be Thursday.
Thank you. Thank you for the update.
Okay. Commissioner Cummings, do you have any reports or comments?
No, thank you, I don't.
I'd like to ask those questions when you're chewing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Miller, do you have any reports or comments?
Nothing at this time, thanks.
Okay. I'm going down my list here. Commissioner Singh, do you have any reports or comments?
No reports or comments today. Thank you.
Commissioner Apuda?
Yes, I do have a comment I'd like to make. I said it quite a bit at the last meeting that I really appreciate the effort that everyone, both the commission and city staff and anyone else, to get the community out last week. I was really struck with how important it is to have representation at these hearings. As I looked at how some of the votes went, I think from my perspective, individuals felt like they could only vote for their, what I would say, affinity group, interest groups, best interests, as opposed to the whole of the city's interests. That really struck me. And it speaks to, as we move forward as a commission, how critical it is for us to be weeks out working to get the community to these hearings so that all voices are heard. when we're making these kinds of recommendations. So I just wanted to speak to that in whatever way that we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Laputa. Commissioner Vang, do you have any reports or comments?
No reports, just, I don't feel well today, so I'm gonna stay as long as I can. And then, I'm probably gonna have to leave early today. Just
Okay.
woke up not feeling great today, so just letting you guys know ahead of time.
All right. Well, we're sorry to hear that and we hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Commissioner Parks, do you have any reports or comments?
Yes, just a quick comment. I'm all by my lonesome here in the council chambers, and I enjoyed the opportunity to be in person last week with Commissioner Singh and the week before that with Commissioners Barraza and Dolan. So I would just like to encourage my fellow commissioners, if you can, to come to the meetings in person. It's really lovely to be here together and do this work, seeing your face in person. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Parks. And Chair McCoy, do you have any reports or comments?
No reports or comments. No, I do have one comment. I received some calls from our last meeting stating that when participants out in the public were trying to take the survey that was being given last week, that they requested for us not to ask questions while they were trying to take the survey. So I just would encourage, whenever we have public participation, that we hold our questions off until we bring it back to the commission to ask for questions, because some of the people, some of the public was a little confused on the survey, and it really, I guess, ticked them off that we were asking questions while they were trying to take the survey. So just hold questions until we bring the item back, and then we can have our discussion. So that would be my comment. And thank you, Vice Chair Dolan, for starting the meeting off for me, but I can take it over if you want me to right now.
I would like that very much, thank you. The pressure was almost unbearable here.
Well, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Cummings.
Oh, you saw me. Thank you. I wanted to make a comment. I hope it's okay to go after I was asked to speak up and I didn't. When we do have public comment and we have an inclination to follow it up, because I think that's also important, and I'm sure you agree with me, Chair, and the Commission, especially if it's sort of an area that we have exposure to. And I'm thinking particularly, there were some questions about Roding Park and the trees at Roding Park. And I kind of looked into that just to make sure. I'm thinking that it might be good at some time for me to pull together a little bit of information about that, about the plan for trees at Roding Park, just a few minutes on one of our commission meetings, and share that with everybody so that we're all informed on sort of the plans with those for the trees for the future there.
I believe you can do that by requesting a agenda item.
Okay.
And that will be fine. Just request an agenda item, and when we do the setting for the agenda, we can take that in consideration of placing you on there.
Okay, I'd love to do that, because I wouldn't want to think that for the community member to think that we didn't take that comment and, you know, to and do something about it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for going the extra step. Do we have any other commissioners with any reports or comments before we move on? All right, we will now move on to City Administration and Park staff reports and comments. City Administration, does anyone from the administration have any reports or comments for the commission?
Good evening, this is Francine Kane, and right now the City Administration does not have reports or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine. Does anyone from the park staff have any reports or comments for the commission?
I do. I have two. Aldi Ramirez, Projects Administrator with the Parks Department. We first wanted to just let everyone know that we have Spanish, Hmong, and Punjabi interpreters available at tonight's meeting. And I would also like to announce for the public or any commissioners that did not hear that the Parks and Public Works item requesting approval to use Measure P funds to fund additional staff members to be dedicated to improving parks and services to the community will be presented at this Thursday's City Council meeting, 11/4/21. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. We will now move on to unscheduled and scheduled communication. Would any member of the public like to speak on any issue within the jurisdiction of the commission? You have 3 minutes.
Yes, we have one. Glenna, you're unmute. Aldi, I think I made you a co-host. Can you unmute Glenna? Were you able to mute her?
Yeah. Oh, I think I promoted her.
Yeah, it keeps telling me to promote. Okay, Glenna?
Yes. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I didn't get it on time, but I didn't hear the very beginning of what was going on until I joined. And so what are they, what was with the trees or something with the roading part? Is that like they're going to plant some more or what?
No, ma'am. There were some questions that were asked last meeting in regards to trees in Rodian Park. And one of our commissioners, Commissioner Cummings, is going to submit a request to have that placed on the agenda. And once that's on the agenda, then she would have her discussion about trees at Rodian Park.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Is there anyone else? That is all.
All right, we will now move on to discussion items. 11A, Parks Identification of Projects and Priorities, process. Would WRT please begin the presentation? He can't hear you, John.
Hello, this is John Gibbs from WRT. And could you confirm which item? Because we have 2 items on the agenda tonight.
Sure. Item 11A, ID number 21814. Parks Identification of Projects and Priorities process.
Gotcha. Okay. Not the order that I was prepared for, but we will roll with it.
Thank you, John.
Thought we were doing highest need. All right, so give my colleague a minute to pull up, make sure that that one is up, and Christina will share screen. So I can just give a little intro here, and then kind of get right into this item. So this is an informational item for you all, and really for conversation. We've spent a lot of time determining areas of highest need, and that's going to be an agenda item here coming up next on this call tonight. But ultimately, this city commission, city council is also going to be defining projects to move forward with as priorities. And we're not defining that process tonight or even the next meeting, but we're starting to build awareness around what are really important, relevant issues and drivers in order to help inform that process. And tonight, wanted to spend some time beginning to introduce that, and starting with the Parks Master Plan from just a couple of years ago, which put in some, obviously some extensive effort around determining community priorities, goals for a park system, specific parks and projects and areas of needs, and wanting to present that to the commission and to the greater community tonight as good background. And I think you'll see its relevance as we go through this. And so with that, I can just keep rolling. And again, maybe just for introductions, my name is John Gibbs, and I'm a principal at WRT. I'm a landscape architect and a planner. I had the fortune of working with many of you, working with the city of Fresno to lead this Parks Master Plan that was adopted in early 2018. I'm joined on the call by a couple of folks that were also part of that process, one being Sheila Hakimipour from Urban Diversity Design, and also listening in on the call is Mike Svets from PROS, and you're going to be meeting Mike at a subsequent meeting, but he's listening in tonight just to get to know you, the commission, and I just want to recognize his good work as part of that Parks Master Plan. So kind of why the Parks Master Plan is important, kind of where we're going with this. And so on screen is a loose diagram that identifies three major things through graphic colors and circles. The first being the Fresno Parks Master Plan, the second being the highest need communities, which is a recommendation that you guys are making tonight, and later also community emerging priorities. And there's different important things that come into each of these topics. On the part of the Parks Master Plan, we identified specific access gaps, places where there were no parks. We also looked at park condition, in particular, identifying poor condition parks. We took many of those parks and we put them into tiers of types of improvements. And those really affected different outcomes and different priorities for some of those park projects. I'll talk through that a little bit more later. The public weighed in through pretty intensive workshops about their priorities for parks. And we also identified some what we called flagship parks, and I'll identify that as well. So lots of really important information. And this was now a couple of years ago, so it's hence we are doing a couple of refresh and little updates here as a separate process, but really important work, and I think it informs an important basis. And tonight we just want to spend some time talking through that, because all of these things really begin to inform park priorities for Measure P funding. So our agenda is to give an overview of the Fresno Parks Master Plan. I want to spend a little time talking about park conditions. I want to talk about the improvement priorities that were identified in that plan by the public. There were some key outcomes, and then we can discuss anything more about this. I gave this presentation to the Parks Master Plan Update Subcommittee. It was a version of this, and they seemed to find it very valuable, and so hence it's also hopefully going to be valuable to the whole group. So this is a good title slide. Some of this content was actually presented to City Council as part of the adoption even. But this is just a snapshot of the cover part of the document. So let's move into it. So why was the plan launched initially? Park master plans that look at the entire city are really important tools that cities and municipalities use for planning parks. The last master plan had been done almost 20 years prior, more than 20 years prior in 1989. And a lot had changed since then. Certainly a growing population, a changing city in terms of its demographics, much greater cultural diversity in the population, and technology certainly changed as well. In 1989, we weren't talking on our cell phones and we weren't doing Zoom meetings, so lots had changed. And the condition of the park system, I think, was alarming to many and was just an important contributor to the urgency of the plan. The process began with a needs assessment, lots of analysis. We visited every single park in the city of Fresno and ranked it, understood its conditions. There was lots of engagement with many stakeholders, broad community participation. That process really continued as we went through the plan. We developed recommendations and ultimately a master plan that was adopted by City Council. The engagement brought together groups of people that might have an interest in parks as stakeholders, everything from Tree Fresno or Building Healthy Communities or CFCTA, Fresno Arts Council, many groups that were involved and very active stakeholders. Big workshops with lots of people, and ultimately we did multiple workshops in each council district, so really good representation. And we made people work at those workshops. We made them help us understand priorities around existing parks, to help us prioritize opportunities for new parks, and really importantly, help us understand the priority. If there's limited resources, where do we spend the money? And the exercise that the children are holding up asks people to put dollars in different pots. One being, these are parks, existing parks that we just need to maintain. These are new parks, and actually I don't remember what the third bucket was, but it really sort of brought home that point about take care of what you have, which was an important outcome of the master plan. Other great pictures. So we also talked about in the master plan, just understood dollars and cents, how are we doing? We looked at the finances and the operations, park condition. We looked at acreage. There's deficiencies of acreage within the city of Fresno. And we looked at gaps, both in terms of the quality of the park as a gap, but also the quantity of parks as a gap. And we talked a lot about the finances and operations and the issue that oftentimes municipalities, and we in Fresno were really no exception here, that it's great to fund a new park, or it's great to fund a new thing in a park. It's often a little harder to fund enough people to maintain those parks. And it's really difficult for municipalities to find enough money to put the money away to replace the thing that they just invested in. And so this idea of total cost of ownership is something that Mike Svets is going to bring back and talk to us a little bit more about. Just healthy financial planning of a park system is a really big deal. And it really got us into trouble before. A lot of districts and municipalities are challenged by this because it's difficult to put that money away for the replacement of things. But we'll make a good case for it. And then a couple of outcomes, some key findings that the Parks Department was really doing the best they can, but they were just really woefully underfunded. Just limited resources was really the biggest problem. Met a lot of committed people, but just not enough money to go around. Additional money was needed for maintenance. Up to $5 million or more was really needed annually. That there's a need to continue to fund the replacement of things, and that there's some larger numbers associated with what the replacement costs are. And really more money is needed annually, which kind of was the other obvious question. We looked at the overall distribution and the acreage of parks relative to population, and found that additional acreage was needed today. So in 2017, we needed almost another or over 1,000 acres of additional parkland would be needed. And by 2035, which is the timeline of the general plan and the population that the general plan had assumed and projected, that need was actually 1,769 acres. So as time goes by, additional acreage is going to be needed to sustain this population, and we're already in a deficiency. It was also important to note that for every acre that you add, you have to also add additional dollars to maintain those parks. $10,000 to $15,000 was a rough number that we also wanted to keep people mindful of. When we went out and visited the parks, we found that some of them were in good shape, but really a minimal number. And about 80% were in the fair and poor category, which is not great. And I think that many of us are aware of that while there may be some parks that exist, many of them are really in poor condition, or they're functioning in fair condition. And you can see on the map the general distribution of where a lot of those poor condition parks are. And this was certainly a factor in our highest needs discussion. So what do we mean when we say it was in poor condition? We found broken paving, often that wasn't accessible. And on the slide here is a list of the text, but there's also a couple pictures from some parks. A really important problem that we found was irrigation systems that were broken. And we're both mindful of water, mindful of loss of water in a drought. And a broken irrigation system often is a source of water waste. And it results in fields that with dead grass that are largely unusable for a lot of the athletics and a lot of the sports. We also see a decline in trees associated with irrigation, and trees and shade are obviously quite important to us. So a pretty big deal, and all stuff that's hidden underground. It's not even stuff that you see. Broken furnishings, lack of lighting, things that were just outdated. Sometimes the wading pools that were there since the 50s that were broken were drained full of leaves, and it's just not a functional feature that people use today. Instead, we might see splash pads or spray grounds and things like that, other ways to keep cool in a modern time. And we saw lots of fencing that was unnecessary, fencing that detracted from the parks, or fencing that was broken and had been cut. Just lots of things associated with the perimeter and the edges of parks. So there's just a couple of things that we saw. Switching over to amenity gaps, this was really an important function of the park master plan. So we looked at where are there parks, and we looked at the service area of those parks, and looking specifically at the half-a-mile walking distance or a 10-minute walk shed to a park is shown in green. So this is a map of the city. The dots are parks, and the green areas are those areas served by the park. And the green areas are different sizes around the dot, because some parks have a really well-connected street grid around them, and it's pretty easy to walk to a park. Some parks are right up against a freeway, which really cuts off a lot of access to a park, or a railroad, or there just aren't many sidewalks out in that area, or vacant lands. And so some of those circles, or some of those green areas, are a little smaller. The other thing the map begins to show here is in pink, and the light pink is all the urbanized areas where people live, and the dark pinks are areas of higher concentrations of people. And so you can see some areas here where there's a lot of pink, there's no park. There's a lot of dark pink, meaning there's a lot of people living there with no park. And if you look closely, you'll also see that some of the dots that representing a park are red, and those are poor condition parks. And so thinking ahead to beginning to identify some priorities, you can start to see that some of the parks in Fresno are serving a huge area. There's a lot of pink around them. There's a lot of dark pink around them. And in some cases, the park itself is in poor condition. And so there's actually not even a lot there to serve all that large community that it otherwise would be trying to serve. So this map is a pretty important map, and I would hope that you guys might pin it up on your wall and reference it down the road. We just zoom in just a little bit. I just wanted people to be able to see. So this is looking a little bit more north of Shaw, and in a minute we'll show south of Shaw. You can see some of these concentrations of green. You can begin to see a lot of the gap areas, and you can also see a couple of the parks that really potentially could serve a lot of people. There's a lot of dark pink around them, but it's a poor condition park. So through our engagement, which was both by a survey where we had large numbers of people contributing over a month period, and giving us a lot of good response. We had the same survey through pop-ups and in person, and then we had other in-person events. So lots of really good input, and we generated a couple things. First, in the upper right corner, just some opinion about parks and their amenities, and how did people feel about them. And a majority of people, 22 plus 35%, had a pretty poor opinion or a somewhat unsatisfactory opinion of parks. So a lot of need, a lot of consensus around we have a problem. There were a number of top programs that were identified. This is not statistically valid, but I just want to give an idea of some of the things that we heard. So we heard a lot of importance about junior giants. We heard a lot of importance in youth sports, after school programs. These were some of the programs that were really important to people. And you might think, where do those facilities or what types of facilities are needed to support those programs? That starts to become a capital response to a program. And then what were some of the highest demands for recreational facilities? A lot of folks wanted picnic areas and felt that that was underserved, places to gather and ostensibly with shade. Community gardens were important, dog parks, soccer fields, and splash pads, spray grounds, places to cool off. I think pools were a close behind with this, but these were some of the top ones. And overall, which was telling, people were really supporting an increase in public funding for parks, and hence Measure P came along and really built on that support. So a good outcome of the plan. This is a slide that has a lot of detailed information that's really not important. This is a map of the city on the left-hand side with a series of dots placed on it in strategic locations that I'll explain in a second. And on the right side is a page out of the Parks Master Plan, which summarizes the feedback that we received from each of the workshops in each council district. And largely what it tells us is that folks, if you're able to zoom in, folks were pretty excited and interested in maintaining the existing parks that we had, renovating those existing parks, and then to a lesser degree investing in new parks. And that was based on the lack of funds that were available. Of course, with Measure P, we have more money available both to maintain, renovate, and there's a bucket set aside for new parks. And then the map on the left are locations for some of those new parks in a very generalized way. These were not by intersection so much as generally what parts of town were their comments about needing more parks. And so lots of dots on the west side, lots of parks in southeast, lots of dots around downtown, and a large concentration north of 99 and west of 41. We put each of the parks into some specific categories. And this was an important exercise that city staff were heavily invested in. And so based on community input, based on a lot of staff input, the master plan describes parks fitting into a first bucket, which is to the parks that really should be just maintained, and the funding should be there to maintain those parks. They're largely already in okay shape. We just really need to maintain them. And the second bucket had to do with a more strategic set of investments, really improving those parks. So maybe that wading pool that was defunct really needs to be turned into a spray ground, or we need to add a new amenity to that park. And the third bucket being visionary, and these were parks that would be completely remaster planned, reimagined, and rebuilt. And this is just a really helpful way to organize a park system, organize a series of parks in a park system in order to be able to move forward. And I'm not going to get into the next slide. I think has some of those lists, but this is incomplete. These are just some examples out of the master plan. And so in the master plan, you can find each of these tiers and the list of parks that are associated with them. Again, this is just a sample. So we said what were the key priorities coming out of this master plan? And this is a slide that we presented to council associated with the adoption. And the consensus at the time was to improve what you have, to work hard to close the gaps in those areas that don't have parks. And lastly, there's a lot of importance around securing the parks that we have, bringing positive activities into those parks, providing the level of security that makes people feel comfortable in those parks. And that was really the third and kind of most important takeaway for City Council at the time. So just some quick examples. You know, this is taking Rotary Sports Center and simply saying, you know, you've got an entrance. It's a photograph of the not really attractive entry to that park. Also a pretty worn out field and a building that's beige and a little unexcited there on the other photo, and then doing some simulations that just show what are some low cost kind of high value improvements, maintaining what we have, renovating it and turning it into something exciting and something usable. Again, this is just an example that was used in the master plan. And the next slide talks about closing those gaps, and the master plan identified through this slightly different graphic. This is very similar to the graphic we saw before of looking at the whole city of Fresno, those service areas in green around each park, and then the areas of yellow and red. We included some other factors in there associated with population density, as well as some health factors to identify some areas of high need. And basically anything in red or dark orange, which there's some significant areas of on this map, those are really important target priority areas. And so we asked ourselves, how can we add more parks to the system when we don't have enough money? Land is actually quite expensive to buy. What are some other strategies? And so we talked about expanding school and joint use agreements for basins as one of the strategies. And the next slide, I think, shows what would happen if you utilized schools and basins in those areas in order to provide other amenities. And you can see in the difference, it starts to really begin to address some of those darkest red areas and darkest yellow areas. So it just told us, hey, this is a pretty good strategy to consider. We also talked about what we called flagships or priority parks. And this, again, in an area of scarcity, how do we come up with a series of parks that are key priorities in each council district? So there's some political equity, and how do we really identify those 3 key parks in each district that need a lot of work? And it sort of begins to self-select in a way, because many of the parks in Southwest Fresno and Southeast Fresno, these are parks that actually need quite a bit of work, versus some of the parks in some of the northern districts are already in pretty good shape and would actually require some less investment. But in any case, could really be important parks for the community. And so it's not to say that all the parks aren't important, but hey, if we could pick 3 in each district, what would they be? And those shook out like this, and there's a list of those parks that are here on the slide. And so I think for your takeaway, just note that, yeah, coming out of the master plan, these were some of the really important parks that might want to move forward soonest. And lastly, we talked about some urban greening strategies in the context of the master plan, both opportunities for new parks, but enhancements to tree canopies, community gardens, bicycle access, stormwater, green infrastructure things, pedestrian access to parks, and just good beautification. So these were also some of the things that were described, and you'll find those in the master plan. And lastly, securing the parks, both pop-up programming, putting movies into the parks, also just hosting recreational activities in parks and bringing more eyes and more activities was one of the strategies in the plan. So what this slide then begins to show is more of a culmination. So there's lots of parks in Fresno. What were some of the key parks in a couple different categories? And we put them all on one slide here. So the first category was parks that were in poor condition. The second category were parks that the community had identified as priority. And lastly, flagship parks. And flagship parks were, to a degree, a combination of community priority and some other factors. And so in yellow are the highlighted parks that actually occur in all three. So there won't be a quiz on this tonight, but this is, I think, a helpful resource for the commission and the greater public moving forward as parks that had been identified previously as having a lot of importance and actually having a lot of need. So one of the questions we asked ourselves was, well, that was in 2018. What have we been doing in the meantime? And the city staff were very helpful in pulling together some updates. And in fact, a lot of stuff has been going on. I think we need to work on if this changes some of the outcomes associated with the master plan for any of these parks or not. But some important work has gone on, and we want to document that. Quigley was one of the pretty important parks. It serves a huge population. It was in poor condition. And so really importantly, it was the subject of a Prop 68 application in order to get new funding to help renovate that park. So, we don't have things built yet, but some good work was obviously done there. Other things at Frank H. Ball, Fink White, Mariella Brown, Vineland, Carey, Einstein, and Romaine. So all pretty important parks associated with the master plan and some good improvements that have been made. And next is some additional information about the budget. So of course the Parks Master Plan identified some pretty serious funding gaps, and you can see them right there at just as we did when we were doing the work. So in 2017, we were operating on 15,000 something. We had capital expenditures of around 3 million, total budget of around 21 million. And looking forward on this table on the far right side, we have the 2022 adopted budget, and we can see a pretty big increase in the budget, which is really good news for parks in Fresno. And I'll just kind of let the numbers speak for themselves, as I don't have a lot of other insights to this, but appreciate city staff helping pull some of these numbers together. They paint a helpful story and a positive trajectory. And so with that, I can really kind of wrap up that conversation on that background from the master plan. We always like to just include in here the slide, largely because these are going to be posted onto a website location that the community can access, and so it's good to have updates on Measure P here in this. But I think with that, this just kind of brings us back to, okay, if we're beginning to think about how to identify projects and park priorities, I hope that this presentation tonight and some subsequent conversations can help frame what the master plan said and what were some of those important themes. The highest need communities is an action item tonight going to council, so that'll be in place. And then we have ongoing community engagement through potential online surveys, ongoing commission meetings, and we'll be rolling out in-person engagement. Again, not defining all of this tonight, but the ongoing community conversations are also going to be important to defining priorities. With that really wraps up my presentation. As an informational item to you all tonight. I'm happy to.
Oh, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Just, yeah, happy to either entertain questions or let that settle. I'm at your disposal.
John,
All right. Do any commission members have any questions regarding this item? Go ahead, Vice Chair.
thank you. John, I note that Woodward and Roding are not categorized differently on this list. I mean, you picked them up in some, but not in others, and not considered flagships, et cetera. Do you have a separate category for those two, which I note are our largest parks, and in that way quite distinct from most of our parks?
I think that's a fair question. I don't think I have a clear, good answer for you right now.
Okay. That's fair enough.
They were discussed often during the master plan as different kinds of, a different kind of park, each one, and we talked a little bit about this at a previous meeting, both in great need, both offering incredible cultural resources and of great interest. But I think there was at the same time, there was also a sense that in order to solve for the kind of local and immediate neighborhood needs that people have with parks and access to playgrounds, access for picnic areas, that the master plan also really identifies the local neighborhood serving park. And we often used in some of the criteria, we looked at a park and said, does it have those kinds of facilities? And we also, we recognized sometimes we would want to add those kinds of facilities to a particular park just to make it more neighborhood serving, more neighborhood friendly. Less so with Roding and Woodward, although I think there's a mix of both local and regional serving features certainly in both of those parks. So hopefully that answers it. I don't think it's a clear answer, but there's some nuance there in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Akuda, you have your hand up?
I do. Thank you, John, as always, for a great presentation. I wonder if you could pull the slides back up, and the slides where you show the Basin and Fresno Unified expansion. Can you show those two slides, the before and the after? It went by a little fast for me.
Yeah, we're getting that back up now. Sometimes it's helpful to toggle back and forth. So on this map, you can see the green, which is a service area of a particular park, that walking distance, and then the areas of yellow and red, the red meaning having more weight to it. We call these heat maps because more of the factors applied of population, of some health factors that we were using. I think we were using like some cow and virus screen type data that we were able to access. And so those areas of red a lot of people live there. There's some challenges in those communities and there's no park. So in some ways, this was an early version of highest need, perhaps, associated with some of those neighborhoods. We've obviously have different criteria now. And then now we're kind of toggling back and forth. And so there's actually, in this one I believe this map is just schools. I'm not sure if this map is basins or not. Actually, I think I'll have to go back and check. This legend is a little confusing to me because I thought that the blue was actually basins. But nonetheless, if you were to put basins in schools in play, and you applied a service area to it, this map just begins to say, well, you can break down some of those red and yellow areas on the map. And
will you toggle for me?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Commissioner Singh? You have your hand up?
Yeah. Hey, John, thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask two questions, actually. My first is, do we already have any joint use agreements with any school districts or basins at this moment?
Yes, there's a number of parks which are joint, which are joint use with the, is it the irrigation district? Now I'm a little bit rusty on some of my agencies, but yes, there's basins that are parks, and those were counted because they were usable and had access to it. On the part of the school district, I believe that there were a few.
Okay,
and maybe Scott would weigh in with a clear answer. I see he's just popped in to save me.
Thank you, John. Commission members, Scott Mosier, Public Works Department. I just wanted to add that the basins are Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District.
There we go. Thanks.
And I did want to add for the existing basins that are not currently used for recreation joint use, they actually do have a dual purpose, and that is for recharge of stormwater. So those are actually an essential component of for our public utilities department and for the water division in terms of maintaining our groundwater resources with that recharge. So it may seem like the water is sitting there and we're missing a great opportunity. But each one of those would have to be carefully evaluated to see, if we're going to make it a recreational basin, then we take it offline from a recharge perspective, and how does the city and the utility, how do we achieve that water balance in the area? Thank you.
So I wanted to ask, so what about school districts at this moment? Do we have any joint use agreements with any school district? Or could you provide us with a list of the school districts we do have the joint use agreement with?
This is TJ Miller, Parks Director. I can speak to the school districts. We do have partnerships for the Spark program where we provide after-school programming at 29 of the different sites. We can get that list to you. We also just finished a partnership with the aquatics using some of the blue space. In terms of the green space, prior to COVID, we did have an agreement to use several of the Fresno Unified School District campus during the weekends for weekend recreation and fitness. But when COVID came into play, those agreements went on pause, and we have not yet lifted those. We do not have the staffing to staff those school sites. We're staffing our parks currently.
Okay, sounds good.
Does that help?
Yeah, that list would be wonderful to have. Thank you, TJ.
Okay, absolutely.
And I wanted to ask, why are we only including Fresno Unified? There are other school districts in Fresno, so like.
Yes, we do have Central Unified too as well. I apologize. I should have mentioned that.
So is that included in this map?
I'm not certain.
I believe we included any. I think we were agnostic to which district it was. Also, just, there's maybe two quick points. One is a lot of cities do have joint use agreements with school districts, and it provides some benefit. But also, it's also true to say these are not always, many cities don't, and school districts and cities are entirely different entities, are operating at some oftentimes different purposes. And it's a fair amount of work also to establish these agreements, but there can be some good benefits.
So yeah, I just wanted to ask if Central Unified was also included in this as part of the closing the gap strategy. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that because I think it'd be wonderful to have all of our school districts. I know that it is a lot of work, but that space that's already there can definitely help in terms of closing the gaps.
Exactly, right.
And John, this is Aaron Aguirre, Assistant Director of Parks. Just wanted to kind of add to the basins that Scott talked about. Some of those are seasonal based on retention. A lot of our Manchester Park and some of the other basins are closed typically after about November 1st. So those are turned back over to the district for their use. and then the city will reopen those, I believe it's April 1st. So some of those are seasonal use type green spaces. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks.
Commissioner Barraza, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to point out, and thank you, John, for an excellent presentation. But I think that some of us that are a little bit older remember some of the other issues that were happening when the general plan was being updated. And one great thing the city did was to identify the discrepancy of parks between the north and south. And I noticed that Shaw Avenue was the border that was selected to distinguish the north from the south. But I think the other point that I wanted to make was that at that time we were comparing Fresno to other cities of similar size in the nation. And we were on the top 90, I believe, close to 100. And I like to see down the road to continue to monitor where we stand. Because one great positive thing that's happening, we now have resources that are being invested in the improvement of parks. And we like to see how we are improving compared to the rest of the nation. Also, when you show us the numbers of expenditures, annual expenditures for several years, if you could please include also the general fund component, somehow show us what we're investing from the local resources. Even Measure B happen to be local resources, but I mean, the general fund being the money that can be used for anything. We'd like to see that on your charts, if you could, please, when you give us those reports. Thank you.
Noted. The ranking that you were referring to, I believe Commissioner Barraza, was the Trust for Public Lands park ranking, and Fresno was not in a very enviable position. I think, towards the bottom. That is something that they update, not annually, every couple of years, and so I would see some improvement. That was a great call to action, and I think it's a really wise decision to continue to look at that, and I think you'll see some improvements. Yeah, that's why we're all here.
Thank you. Do any of the other commissioners have any questions?
Chair McCoy, this is Commissioner Parks. I have just a couple of questions, quick questions. First, I want to second what Commissioner Barraza just said. I made the same note on the slide about the budget. I would love to see the Measure P and general funds just broken out, just so we know where we stand. A quick question, when I was reviewing this earlier this morning, I highlighted the note on the park acreage slide, which states that an extra $10,000 to $15,000 for maintenance costs is needed for each acre. I love seeing numbers like that. It's helpful for me to understand, if we add this many acres, this is what the annual expense is going to be. John, could you just speak quickly to where that number comes from, how that was developed?
Sure. There's some national standards around cost of maintenance, and again, these are pretty high level numbers because depending on what's in that acre, obviously it varies. But a good rule of thumb, looking at industry standards and adjusted for different regions, which those numbers were, those are some of the numbers that you get, and in particular. Our partner on the project from Pros Consulting, a national experts in parks and recreation and operations, helped us with those numbers in particular. And Mike is going to be presenting to the group here coming up. And so that'll be a great question to dig into with him, as he'll have some similar numbers like that. And that'll be a really important conversation for you all, I think.
Great, thank you so much. And then my other question relates to the maps. As I was looking through the presentation this morning, I wanted to dive into the maps, but we can't, in the format that we have them, we can't really zoom in. And I just wondered if there's any way that we could, if they could be posted on the website or somewhere where we could make them a little bit bigger so we can see all of the incredible and important detail that they contain.
Sure. I think that the PDF can be provided, and also these maps are in the Parks Master Plan, and that PDF is quite available online and through the city's webpage, and can be downloaded as well.
That's a very good point. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have any questions for John and his team? Yes, Commissioner Cummings?
Yes. So thank you, John and team, for that presentation. I appreciate that. I just wanted to mention that I liked how you had the rendition of the dull brown Parks building being painted, with that vibrant green, that being an example of it being brightened up. Do we have somewhere, and I'm kind of looking at the old, Parks plan, were there recommendations on when it comes to sort of cooler city environments and types of painting, less reflective surfaces, those kinds of things? Will that be included in the Parks plan?
When you say cooler, do you mean that in a temperature sense or in a more hip kind of sense?
Oh, no, temperature sense.
Okay.
So obviously with the planting of trees and then painting, tops of buildings white. So there are practices that are taking place in other cities that we want to make sure that as we create more buildings or we go back and we spruce it up, that we're doing the best thing to cool down these environments.
I think there's, in the Parks Master Plan, there are some statements around energy consumption more generally, and some strategies included in there. And I would suspect that things like highly reflective roofs and planting and shade, and also of higher efficiency appliances and things that might be in centers. It might be some of those strategies. I remember there was some time spent on that topic associated with the 2018 plan.
Good, because I think in 2021, we should definitely be thinking about kind of the urban heat island effect. And there are some, as we just in the course of business, there are some easier ways that we can cool things down or to make it better for people with these temperatures are very hot, especially in our most disadvantaged communities. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions for John and team before we move on? All right, we will now move on to hearings. 12-A, item number 21-800, actions pertaining to the highest need definition. These are two aspects to this item. First, WRT will present the proposed highest needs neighborhoods definition. Then the commission will consider making a recommendation to City Council to adopt the proposed definition. Would WRT please begin the hearing?
Very good. Hope you guys aren't sick of me. Greetings, Commission. John Gibbs from WRT, and here with my team member, Christina Bejarano. Also, Hannah Goldov is on the line, and Peter Winch is also listening in. Sheila Hakimapur from Urban Diversity Design is here as well, all having contributed to this. Tonight's action, as was just described, is for this commission to formally make a recommendation based on the findings, and hopefully we'll try to be clear about that. We're also continuing our prioritization of language translation and accessibility, so we'll continue to describe maps and what's on screen. And last week was a very great meeting in our minds. You guys kind of got us pretty excited, very enthusiastic response from the public. I think we do our best work with lots of input, and just really appreciated the enthusiasm that members of the community brought to this process. And I really want to thank my team for putting the time in to do this well. This is a data-driven process. This team has checked and double-checked and really worked hard to make sure that we're providing information and important information to you and your city council. And I'm really glad that we've done it, reasonably within a pretty good timeline as well. So really good moving forward. We're going to end our, well, we can go to the next slide and just go into the agenda. And I can just share what we're going to present back. But there's also some important points here where I would like the commission to, and I would like to ask Chair McCoy's guidance in terms of a moment of pause for any questions and answers before we continue moving. So listen for that. Our agenda is first just to recap the materials that we've been presenting previously. So just identifying Measure P, the definition of highest need neighborhood. We'll review those poll questions. We're all going to be pretty brief. We're not going to revisit everything. We're going to move pretty quickly into part one, which is the poll results of the weighted equity factors and therefore the definition of highest need. And what I would ask is if you'd like me to pause there so that the commissioners could ask any clarifying questions before we continue on with part two. Part two is the highest need neighborhoods percentile. And so what is that cutoff point to determine something as highest needs? And we have percentages at 10 and 25, 33 and 50%. And that is a separate discussion and an action point by the commission in our minds. And ultimately, you guys are going to make a motion and a recommendation to council, is my understanding. Chair McCoy, would you like me to pause after I've presented part one, or would you like me to just move through the entire?
I would prefer for you to move through, and then we'll go out to the public and bring back the discussion to the commissioners.
Sounds great. With that, we'll jump right into it. So the next slide is just as we keep doing, just taking a moment, making sure we all understand what we're talking about. So what is Measure P? This is Measure P, and it has these categories of improvements, and the first two being improving and maintaining existing parks to be clean and safe, and the second being funding for new parks, new neighborhood parks, senior and youth recreational facilities. And then there's other categories as well that we've gone over. And the next slide identifies both those existing and new park categories all have important components of funding associated with highest need. And so what's on screen right now is a pie chart with all 5 different areas that Measure P funds, 46% towards existing parks, and then the subcategorization of those pieces of the pie put a certain amount of that funding immediately towards maintenance at $5 million, and then dividing the remaining into 2 halves, 50% highest needs neighborhoods, and the other 50% unrestricted. And then in new parks at 21.5%, 50% of that piece of the pie is highest needs neighborhoods. And so you can see the importance of our conversation and decisions made. There's some dedicated funding through Measure P for specific areas of highest needs and to serve those communities more broadly. The definition of highest needs neighborhood to be determined prior to the first of the year. And this is the language out of the ordinance to create a weighted index incorporating the following data in developing the definition. And these are all the equity factors that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks and had a lot of community feedback about last week in particular, and is the basis of our efforts moving forward here. Letters A through K, and I won't read each one. A new slide here that just begins to identify where we are tonight and recaps where we've been. So the graphic at the top of the page describes November 18, the passage of Measure P. In September 27th, we met with the Highest Needs Subcommittee to begin this process. We then met on October 18th with the full commission, and we gave an overview. We came back a second time on October 25th that was attended by well over 70 members of the community, and we had another meeting, and we took our polling at that time, and then here we are tonight. Moving forward, December 2nd, this item will be heard by the City Council. Your recommendation will move forward to Council, and Council will take formal action, and the highest needs definition will take effect on January 1st. So what we had asked at our last commission meeting was asking members of the public and the commissioners to help us understand for each of these equity factors listed on the page and described in the ordinance, the weighting, and if we should, for a particular item, weight it higher than, whether it would be just left alone to be equal to, or if it would be a little less than average. And we're going to go through, my colleague Christina is going to go through that process, largely a math process, taking the data, the same data from the votes from public and commissioners combined, and just put into an Excel spreadsheet. And Christina, you can talk through kind of those specifics, and then I'll come back for the recommendation.
Great, thank you, John. So as John mentioned, we put together a tally of all of the votes for each of the equity factors. On screen, you see a table, and on the next slide, I'll show you an easier to read graphic. But just to be fully transparent, we had the total number of votes tallied up. We calculated percentages based on, of course, the total number, and then determined whether the factor would be weighted higher, equal to, or less than average based on whether or not the group or the majority or near majority of the group voted in consensus. So I'll show you on the next slide how this lays out here graphically. So across the bottom of the screen, A through K, you can see each of the equity factors that we discussed. And the column above each letter shows you how many people voted, the percentage of people that voted for the factor to be weighted of higher importance, equal importance, or lower importance. And as you can see, in some cases where there was not a majority winner, where it was more of a split vote, then the factor is weighted equally. Whereas where there's a majority or near majority, certain factors are weighted higher than, and one factor in particular, preterm birth by, rated lower than average. So this translates, of course, to the maps, and on the next slide, I'll show you how the equity factor scoring results lay out across the city of Fresno. In dark red, you can we've broken down the legend across the percentiles, top 10%, between basically the top 25%, top 33%, and top 50%, and then everyone sort of in the bottom 50% in gray. So I'll describe what you're seeing here, how it laid out on the map. So the census tracts that fall within the top 10% of this equity factor scoring results are in the darkest red, and you can see those here essentially along just north of Highway 180. There's a census tract just to the east.
of Highway 41, and then some of the areas south of downtown along the 99 corridor, and again, just east of Highway 41. The next tier, the expand out and to include the top 25%. So the top 25% includes the dark red and the orange here. So it expands to the northwest along Highway 180. Some pockets here east of Highway 99. Pockets in the southeast as well as here in south of Jensen. And then the top 33% in this lighter orange color expands several more census tracts. And then finally, the top 50% in the yellow color, so covering half of the city's census tracts.
And so, wrapping that up, the recommendation moving forward then says that the following factors are weighted higher than average, 2 times the average. Those are listed as A, C, E, G, H, and J. And the following factors are weighted just as average, that is B, D, F, and K. And 1 factor to be weighted less than average, and that was factor I. And this is just based on the polling. And so we're reading this into the record largely as basis of what we hope to be your recommendation moving forward. We're going to continue on because the second part of I think your conversation tonight and the voting polling that we did last week had to do with what Christina described were out of the top 50% and broken into these different percentiles. And where should we really draw the line? Should we draw the line just at the top 10%? Should it include all of those top 50% percentile areas of the city as represented on the previous map by all the colored areas as opposed to the grayed out areas? The polling from last week was pretty close between top 25% as the cutoff, which would include the dark orange and the red areas. 36% of the participants had recommended that. Another larger group of people at 32% felt like we should take all of the top 50%. So all of anything within that was identified as in that highest need areas to the 50th percentile. And that, that would be a good way to move forward. Tonight, we would want your commission to discuss this and to make a recommendation to move forward. We have some additional graphics that just begin to graphically represent this in a little different way. So this is, you're in or you're out according to this series of maps. The first showing if we were to only take the top 10%, or excuse me, the top percentile. This map, the red areas grow on the map if we were to take the top 25%. This map shows if we take the top 33%. And lastly, if we were to take the top 50% to be considered for highest needs funding. And the basis of the recommendation moving forward would look something like the top X% of Fresno census tracts based on this weighting shall be considered highest need neighborhoods for the purposes of allocating funds under Measure P. So we would need your discussion and recommendation to fill in the blank on this one. And as I had mentioned before, from here, we'll go to City Council with this recommendation, or I guess your recommendation will go to City Council for their review. And I think with that, that ends our presentation.
Thank you for that presentation, John. Is there any member of the public who would like to make the comment about the current item we are discussing? You will have up to 3 minutes.
Yes, we have Sylvester Hall. Mr. Hall, you are on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First of all, just let me thank the commissioners for your sacrifice, your dedication, all your hard work. I know you guys really care about your districts, but also the whole city and citizens. Thank you, commissioners. Also, I want to thank John Gibbs and his team at WRT. John, great presentation. The whole format of your entire analysis and your particular survey, very well put together. I think in terms of, personal interest and what have you, I think many people know that we have a world-class park on the table for Southwest Fresno at the West Village Development Project. And in saying that, I think we'll be okay through this analysis. We got some things being captured that we'll be able to fight with, to kind of protect South, West, South, East, South Central Fresno. Anybody that is 50 years old or older know South is it, man, in terms of the needs. And you did a good job in your team of capturing that. So thank you so much. The only thing I would really be concerned about is how fast you guys are going to council. I'm a statistician, and you guys definitely are statisticians. And nobody in here can convince me that a survey of 60 people is a valid survey. 9 commissioners and 49 people from the public. When we did our research for West Creek Village Development Park, which is a 10-acre park we donated to the city, and we're going to put another 20 million into the park ourselves. Probably I got a couple buildings to build over there. But at the same time, we brought in over 1,500 people from the community. I mean, we brought in every elementary school, every charter school. We brought in everybody from Computech. Every administrators came in, principals, staff, the students. We brought in the faith-based groups. The city of Fresno was present. Our home builders were present. Everybody was present to determine what went into this park. And now I see you guys getting ready to make recommendations. And you guys know if you go and do a ballot verification, that 60 people is not a valid sample size for this type of a project. So please help me understand that. Can you justify a survey of less than 100 people? I was taught in all my statistics classes and advanced finance classes that you needed a substantial population. So help us with that. Done. Could you help us understand that, please?
Thank you. There are no other public comments.
I will now close the hearing and bring the item back to the commission for discussion. Are there any commission members that have a question or comment? I will start with Commissioner Barraza. You're on mute, Commissioner Barraza.
I'm sorry, I'm trying not to. Now I'm on. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to say that it was much easier to understand this concept of the highest needs percentile, which is statistically is probably a little bit harder to understand than most of the other terms. But what I wanted to point out is when I saw that whether you're in or you're out on those charts that were shown for each category, I was really worried that only the top 50 or the 51, 100% would actually include a lot of the areas that have been identified as not having a lot of parks per 1,000 residents. Therefore, I'm very concerned that we all understand what's happening with those highest needs percentile. But I also wanted to ask our consultant, Mr. Gibbs, what flexibility do we have with the half-mile walking distance analysis as we're selecting an area, and would that help us to, one issue I have, if I could just quickly point out, is in certain parts of Fresno, we have pockets of concentrated poverty that are located right next to very wealthy communities. And I'll be specific. Sunnyside is close to Callaway and other, areas with a lot of poverty. So how do we deal with that, Mr. Gibbs? If you could just help us understand how we deal with that, what might appear to be a challenge.
Am I at liberty to respond to Commissioner's questions? Just want to make sure I'm following protocol. Yep.
Yes, you can respond as long as you have the information that's being asked for.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that in terms of access to parks, but I think the other part of your question was maybe more about within a census block, and this is it's a defined unit and a defined geography, and that's a given for us. Within a census tract, we may well have pockets of great poverty. We may have more affluent areas. There's kind of a mix of things that happen within that, and that's kind of I think a reality that we have to work with, because the ordinance uses the definition of the census tract. But when you were talking about access, you were talking about the access to parks, and I think what's kind of interesting is the half a mile radius that we were talking about in the previous presentation is about how people get to a park, and a particular park may be in or maybe just adjacent to a very dark red or a very high need area, and it may be that there are not park opportunities, or there isn't a park to fund within that red census tract, but there is right next to it and within a half-mile service area. And I think that that's just something that the commission would want to talk about, whether that was helpful in your prioritization. I'm reminded of the Prop 68, and the state grant uses a pin to locate on a map in order to generate. It auto-generates different factors, and depending on where you put your pin, you get different factors, and even within a particular census tract area. And so I think it is worth noting that those adjacencies are quite important, and the census tract can capture a whole host of additional needs within it.
And if I could add that whether you're in or out, it gives you an advantage in terms of meeting a certain criteria or a certain threshold that we have noted on Measure P. But additionally, there are other evaluating conditions that the measure pre-process will take into consideration, such as how long has this community been waiting for a park, and the community might have been struggling for years and years and nothing ever happened. So there are unique circumstances associated with every project site in any part of the city. And because of that, I would incline to favor that as many areas that are eligible be included for consideration. And then with the understanding there are other factors that the selection process will take into consideration. But anyway, I just, maybe that's a way to express my interest in the use of the 51 to 100% item or the top 50% category. So, Madam Chair, that's all. I just wanted to express that concern that we include, that would be as inclusive as possible rather than be exclusive.
Thank you. Dr. Akuda, you have your hand up?
I do. There's two issues. I'd like to get some help with in terms of understanding, and the other is, I think I'll start there. I want to acknowledge and appreciate our community member, Mr. Hall's comment. And I want him to know that you are heard, sir, and we understand your frustration. And I would venture to say, at the risk of speaking for others, that all of us are a little frustrated at our timeline. Last week, I asked the community to have some patience and grace with this new commission. And I think the timeline that WRT presented really shows the answer to your question of, how can we move forward with such a small number of voices in this process? The Highest Needs Committee met in September of this year for the first time, and we have a responsibility for the highest need definition to take effect January 1st. And the timeline that WRT presented, we met September 27th, like at the end of September. And so we had October and November to be able to get this to the council in December. The other thing I want, and I hope that you understand, is that we felt the same way that you do, and your commissioners advocated for the community on October 25th, when there were only 14 community members there. And we said, that's not good enough. And WRT was gracious and worked very hard for us to come back last week, October 18th, right? We met October 18th and we did that process, and there were only 14 community members. And so we did that big push, and we're so glad that folks like yourself were here last week to participate in the process. So we know it is not the best process and it is not the ideal, and we will do better as this commission continues to move forward, but it was the best we could do with the given circumstances that we had. So I just wanted to address your concern, Mr. Hall, because it is a point very well taken. So I wanted to say that. And then the other thing I wanted to say, I every time I think I understand highest needs neighborhood percentile and its relationship to all of this, then I get a little like, maybe I don't understand it. And I don't know if I even know the question to ask to get a clearer understanding. But I'm looking at the work that the results that came out of the polls, right? Can you help me understand how that fits into this final piece of the highest needs neighborhood percentile based on the census? There's something that's not clicking for me in terms of those two things. Am I making sense of why it's just I'm missing something in order to take this next piece and know how I would, which of those census data highest percentiles would make sense for me to recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I'll explain is that sorry, let me pull up the map.
And while you're doing that, I'll say my husband and I also had conversations after last week's meeting, like, wait a minute, what does this really mean? So
yes,
I'm not alone. And
yeah, absolutely.
And he's a smart guy.
Absolutely, yeah. So when we went through each of the equity factors, when you saw the map changing colors and illustrating the data associated with each of those equity factors, that was already based on the census tract designation. So when we're using the term neighborhoods, the census tracts are really the geographic unit of how we're tallying all the scores. So that was consistent.
Say that again for me.
Yeah.
Say that again for me.
The census tract is basically defines the neighborhood, defines the extent of each of the areas, and it's related to how many people are in each part of the community. But basically, when we talk about a neighborhood, at the moment, it uses the census tract as that boundary.
So I understand census tract. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to understand equity factor scoring results based on census tract.
Yeah. So the census tract, when we went through each of those equity factors, essentially the census tract was either that area was used to tally each of the scores based on the definition that we established for each of the equity factors. So if we were to focus on one of the areas that, for example, is in the top 10% percentile of this final map, that means that it's scored in the top 10% of the process, meaning that it scored really highly and enough in the factors that are weighted higher than others, and has a higher score than some of the rest of the areas. So the scoring comes down to, for each equity factor, did that census tract area qualify, sort of meet the definition of being in the highest percentile for each one. And then we went back and weighted some of those higher than others by either doubling that score if it was weighted higher, keeping it equal. Yeah, and then having it.
Let me see if I understand it. These areas, let's take the ones in the dark orange. Are we saying that, for example, of the, 12 or 13 factors, those areas had 9 or 10 of those factors, where another area may only have 2 or 3? Is that what we're talking about when we start talking about the census, the equity factor scoring results based on the census? Is that what we're saying? Okay.
Let's maybe if I could weigh in, let's separate census. Census is simply the geographic unit. It's only like the neighborhood. The data that's being applied to all these neighborhoods and blocks and streets and the communities that we all live in the data is coming from whether it was the Parks Master Plan or the City of Fresno or the state and Cal Enviroscreen and these other established data sets. But then what you said is pretty close, and I think a fair, although the numbers are just samples, but more of those equity factors were present in that neighborhood.
Okay.
And therefore it got a darker color. And when less of those equity factors were present, it got a lighter color. And at some point we cut it off because it's just gray, because it just really didn't register, didn't have enough. And the map here then shows all those different gradients. The darker it is, the more equity factors were present based on the weighting, based on the voting. It's good you're asking this because it is kind of complicated, and it's good to just pause. Thanks for having the courage to ask for everybody.
And then I'm like, so no, that's very, very helpful.
And ultimately there is a mathematical exercise behind it, but the way you described it is like, yes, totally right.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'll let my husband know.
See if you can explain it back.
Commissioner Vang, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm gonna just kind of like follow up with Dr. Puta's question, because Mr. Gibbs, when I'm looking at the Measure P requirement new definition, right, there's 11 components, right? And then when I'm looking at this map, my question is that when we're looking at equity, are we also looking at social disadvantage? Like, are we looking at incomes too, to identify it? Is that a part of the identification of highest need? Does income has anything to do with this? Because I think it's also important that incomes play a part of the decision making here.
The ordinance spelled out those 11 equity factors, and it's only those 11 equity factors that are used to determine highest needs. And we don't have any flexibility around that. We worked exactly within these criteria, and income was not one of the criteria. However, income often aligns with some of these. So G, for example, neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. That means it's extremely low income associated with the term and the definition of poverty. So in a way, yes, but income itself, we didn't map high areas of high incomes, for example. It's focused on concentrated poverty. And that was one that was weighted more heavily in the last meeting.
Okay. And then my second question to you is, because it's kind of hard to understand when I'm looking at the 11 component, the A through K, I'm trying to, figure out A to K, and then there's the additional, how, I'm not going to rationale how it came upon because it's part of the ordinance, but what is your thought when you started doing this in the beginning phase and now? From one of our constituents today, I think his name is Mr. Hall. Are we doing enough publicity, getting community input and voices? I know we did a great job last meeting. I think all commission worked hard, and I think the city staff. But from your from the beginning, when you first started this, do you think the number was a good number, or do you think the number is very low? Like, who participated in the survey?
I think it puts me in a difficult position to answer that question. As much engagement as is possible is always ideal. So I can't really speak to the numbers. Having more than 70 associated with a community meeting, we do lots of community meetings. We do them during COVID and on Zoom. That's a reasonable turnout relative to many meetings that we host out in the public around issues that are important to people. That's a pretty good showing. It's not the highest by any means, but it's not bad. So I could at least weigh in on that. We could also look at attendance at public meetings for the Parks Master Plan. I would say that's higher than some of the meetings. We probably had one meeting maybe with 70 people, 80 people at one particular meeting relative to in-person. Our survey results, we had hundreds, and that was able to be widely administered over a long period of time, and so there's ways to get more input, and we have a community engagement process set up within a reasonable timeline the rest of this year and into next year to be able to do, I think, a better job of that.
Yeah, I just want, thank you. You guys did a great job last week. I think I from my constituency, a lot of our Hmong family and South Asian family participated, and a few of them did tell me, hey, I think that it should have been we should have got more people to come, but with COVID, I understand the pandemic, it hindered some of the work we're doing, and I completely understand our constituents' concern when they said we need more participation of the voice, but as Dr. Buddha says, we have a timeline that we have to follow too. So I understand that, but I think, do you think it's possible, in the future? I don't know if it's something that we, as commissioner, make recommendation, but maybe putting the survey out there openly to the public, and so it could be out there. I know that we had to do the survey during the time we were at the meeting, but I think for future, maybe we should put it out there just so we can have more voices. Where the result comes and it goes straight to your company, and so you guys can all have what we have it at our meeting, and then you can also show a graph of what was out there in the public when people went in and they did their own survey without coming to the meeting, and so they can also have an opportunity to do that in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. One thing that's often challenging is that with complicated information, and just even the conversation tonight of really making sure we're understanding what we're doing, that would be extremely difficult to do. And so I think there's also a function of what are you asking a community to weigh in on, and what's the question that you're asking. And I think that's also an important function of engagement, is asking questions that people are really prepared and giving them the information to make an educated and informed decision. Otherwise, you could all end up with information that isn't, that's based on something inaccurate.
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought that would be appropriate just because I know the information is also for me, it was for me to learn too and to understand. I was trying to grasp this. Actually, the first time when you guys presented, I learned a little bit, but the second time actually it was very thorough. The information was good because we have translator, and so the information was actually presented in a slower manner, so I think it was easier to understand. Another point is just in the future for translation wise, if we can just have it also translated in the language. I know that a few of the Hmong family said that they were trying to understand, when you translate existing condition of parks and facility based on needs assessment data and the plan, when you're saying that in English and you're presenting it into Hmong, sometimes you're speaking and the language is backwards. And so when the person is translating, she's translating as you're talking, but really she's supposed to translate as backwards. And I'm not saying she's not doing a great job. She actually did a really good job. I just think that information just needs to be translated just so they can make a better decision. Because this survey is really important since it's going to be 3 years. The decision that's going to impact the community is going to be 3 years. So I just thought it would be appropriate that we have those things in mind in the future. For the most part, thank you. I really enjoyed some of the information, and the stuff has been presented, the presentation ahead of time really helped me too. So thank you for that. We've been getting your information ahead of time so we can process before we meet. So that also helped.
Thank you. Commissioner Cummings, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Up to now, the city, in conjunction with the commission has defined the highest need neighborhoods as those that are located within census tracts that rank within the top 25% of Fresno census tracts as identified by Callum Virus Screen 3.0. And I'm just reminding ourselves that we're using the defined areas defined by Callum Virus Screen, actually Cal EPA, for the purpose of target investments. So we've utilized this tool in our decision making thus far. And at this point, we're obviously determining a new tool to take us forward. This, for the disadvantaged communities, these census tracts in the top 25%, they take in consideration various sort of layers, what we would call that, like public health, quality of life, economic opportunity, and pollution burden. So my question is, have you considered maybe making a comparison of this sort of evolving tool next to the one that we're currently using with the disadvantaged communities so that we can see how it's stacking up based on the decision making that we've already made and the city council has already made with the projects moving forward? Because to me, I use EnviroScreen quite often. It looks very similar. So I'm wondering if indeed there are reflections of that we see those layers emulating in the same way that we'd see that on EnviroScreen.
Yeah, maybe it's a fair point. We did not. We're following the letter of the ordinance, and we have our work cut out for us just to keep up with that. And I'm not sure.
I guess it's comparing it to the old, right? So we have it in the ordinance. We were allowed to utilize that, which seems like a very good starting point. We decided that. So how does this compare to, our starting point is what I'd be curious to see. And obviously 25% is what they used for the 25%, the top 25% of census tracts and with the various layers that they utilize. So maybe looking at that, like compared to, okay, how we're currently defined and what would happen if we utilize the tool that we have in progress in that sense. So that's, so it doesn't seem so abstract. So are we falling into the same areas? Because there are patterns when you look at air quality, as you mentioned earlier, with low income, quality of life, longevity, even low birth rate. Those there are trends in the city of Fresno, and there seems to be the similar patterns with this evolving tool, which I think is a good thing. I'm not saying it's the be all end all, but it might be good to compare that to, a vetted tool like EnviroScreen 3.0 and the next one that's coming out very soon to see how we stack up in the development of our own tool. Thoughts?
Do you want to respond, Commissioner Cummings, or that was just the thought you had?
Well, to me, it does seem quite logical to look at old tool and new tool and see if they have any semblance of, because they're not developed out of nowhere. I mean, there's a reason why we even within Measure P, they've chosen these particular benchmarks, is because there's bodies of evidence that support, there's research that shows the utilization of public services, et cetera. So I would want to know if it just, because the process we went through was quite subjective. It was, my own thoughts about like how I'm going to rank something. But at the same time, I think the product, the end result, seemed to look very similar to the patterns that you would see in a tried and true EnviroScreen tool. So I personally think that it would be useful to see tool that we're using now that, City Council made passing a budget, on multi-millions of dollars a budget of Measure P, and we actually somewhat endorsed that. So how does that stack up? Would those pass the tests now, today, if we utilize this tool? Would it be the same or would it be different? Is that making sense? I don't know if anybody understands that.
Well, I guess I'm just going back to the ordinance describes the criteria that it describes, and it would be interesting perhaps to look at it a couple different ways, but I'm not sure that would be I'm not sure that changes the course. I think it would just be, it would be interesting. And I'm not sure what the action would be to do anything differently based on, looking at another way. I think there's many comments about if we didn't like certain factors, would we change them? Well, we can't because the ordinance describes it a certain way. So we have the technical expertise to look at it as many different ways as the commission or the city would like us to. But I just would have to defer to the language of the ordinance and the process that we're in for right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Singh, you have your hand up.
Yes, I did want to, so my question is, when we decide on the definition of which percentile will be considered highest needs, we will be limited in using the highest needs funds to those specific areas, right? So my question is, if we do choose, say, the 50%, are we required to invest in every single area, or after we choose that, if we choose that one, we can also later on go and choose which areas, not choose which areas, but see which areas have highest needs within those areas and invest in those areas? I said areas quite a lot, but.
Yeah, I don't know that I can totally answer that because I'm not sure exactly what the roadmap is. I think that what I would say is that tonight you're just determining the first pass, and I think that the road ahead has may have other criteria for prioritizing ultimately, which park. You have a certain amount of money that's going to be available, and that money can go so quickly. There is so much need in all of your parks, and in the ability to invest in new parks. Parks are expensive, and while we have great amount of money, there's still going to be great need. And so you're still going to have some additional prioritization in order to determine particular projects. And so I would say that, tonight is really a first pass at just move forward with a definition of highest need that allows you to move forward with the process of continuing to identify priorities and projects and parks across the board.
Okay, so thank you for answering, Mr. Gibbs. That was very helpful. With that said, I would like to just kind of as a unofficial recommendation to my fellow commissioners, recommend that we actually vote on the 50% highest percentile, at least to open up the option within those areas rather than limit ourselves later down the line. We got a lot of public input last week that was very good, but we are also missing a lot of public input from a large part of the community. And so I think if we leave our options open, we are also letting ourselves be open to community input later on. Thank you.
Commissioner Barraza?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I happen to support the suggestion of Commissioner Singh, but I wanted to suggest something, if you could do it quickly. Could you please show us again the four maps? That the one, I can't remember what John called them. I call it the in or out, you're in or you're out. I think that's so significant because that tells you the overall impact of the process. You're either in or you're out. And that's the reason why I like the 50% one, because it's more inclusive. It allows more communities that are having the problems that are described in the surveys participate. And so if that would be okay with your permission, Madam Chair, we just quickly review those maps so that we can see what's exactly covered.
Yes, that'll be fine.
We're just pulling that up on the screen.
Sorry, I thought you could see me walking through this. I'll do it again.
Bingo. So there we go. So this is the map with top 50%, and then we'll just click downward.
And John, real quick, if I could just interject, just because it seems like it may not be clear, when we're talking about the ordinance and the highest needs neighborhoods, the ordinance specifically says that there are certain buckets of money where at least 50% of Measure P funds in that bucket would need to go to the highest needs neighborhoods. So if a neighborhood is not identified as a highest need neighborhood, it does not mean that it won't be eligible for Measure P. It just means it's not part of that top 50% or the 50% of funds that must go to highest needs neighborhoods. Just wanted to clarify that in case anybody was confused.
Right. Yeah, there's still other buckets of funding, but it has that guaranteed funding. So we could just, we have that on screen now. Maybe we click back through the sequence slowly. So this is top 33, top 25, top 10, and then we go back in reverse order. That responds to the request. There may be another hand. I see a hand from Commissioner Darlene.
Yes. So just a clarifying question. I underscore that we are our charge here is to find the highest need neighborhoods. By this logic that we're walking through right now, we could just say 100%, right? Because that way everybody will be covered. Is it that we only have a set amount of money and it has to cover more and more as we go further down the percentage, so to speak? Is that a correct way to characterize this? I don't even know who I'm asking that. Maybe it's you, John. Maybe it's Christy. I'm not sure. In other words, there are Measure P funds that have to cover these highest need neighborhood parks.
Correct. And so just for an example, let me see if I can find it real quick. I didn't have it up. Well, just for an example, I believe that in the ordinance, 46% of funds need to go,
we'll go to the pie.
Yeah, go to current parks, improving and maintaining existing parks. Okay, so 46% of Measure P funds goes specifically to improving and maintaining existing parks. But under that specific section, at least 50% of that 46% must go to the highest needs neighborhoods. It could be more, it could be, 70%, but at least 50% must go to these highest needs neighborhoods.
So I guess this is where I'm trying to look at those graphical representations of the information with this piece of information as well and say like, okay, so if we take 50%, there's 100 parks. Each park gets $10. If we take the top 10%, there's 10 parks and each park gets $1,000. I mean, is that the kind of situation where we're in, where the larger the pool that we are saying is higher needs, the less any single facility or expansion or improving and maintaining the existing ones, the less money there is available for any individual project?
I'm not sure that you could say that if you had $10 and 10 parks, that every park gets $1, because I think the commission and city council moving forward could elect to put $10 into one park or $5 each into 2 parks. I think that flexibility still exists. So I'm not sure that it would be a fair statement to say that the pot would just be spread thin, because ultimately we have to figure out what are the projects, what are those things that we're actually doing and building and acting on in these parks. But I think there's a point in your statement also, though, that you are pushing just prioritization decisions, perhaps down the road a little bit by more places. But that may be a benefit as well. I think it kind of goes both ways. So I think it's a fair point, but I'm not sure it. Well, I'll stop.
Ernie.
I kind of actually want to expand on what you're saying, Mr. Gibbs. I think that, we're not necessarily pushing it away, but we are giving ourselves more time and this is my personal belief, my personal opinion, that things have been quite rushed up till now. And by no one's fault, it's just how it was. But if we do have the chance to give ourselves more time, not necessarily time, but more flexibility in where we're going to invest in our parks. Not saying that, hey, the top 10% aren't going to get the priority that they don't need, but at least we're opening up that flexibility to say, okay, just as much as money we can invest here, we can invest there too. I don't know if that last part made sense, but I hope you all get the gist of what I mean. That'll be all.
Dr. Puda, you have your hand up?
I do. I'm really taking in the comments from Commissioner Singh about broadening the area and allowing for more options as we move forward in making decisions. And Commissioner Barraza talking about being more inclusive. And also listening to Commissioner Dolan. I'm not a mathematician, but I just did a little math and looking at, I'm glad this is the slide that's up. So out of that 46% for existing parks, if you look at $38 million, and someone else do the math to make sure I'm right, the 46% would be about $17 million. So we would say then the 50% that would be designated for highest need would only be about $8.6 million. And you think back to what Mr. Gibbs is saying about how expensive things are, right? How far would that $8.6 million really go when you start looking at, do we take the 30-some% versus the 50 or 51%? And then when you look at the new parks situation, the 21.5%, I believe that's $8.17 million. And so the highest needs, and this is of course in any given year, the highest needs, that 50% would be $4 million. It's not a lot of money. And so how far can we spread $4 million in terms of as we think about making the decision, a logical decision of being more inclusive and being broader versus being the most impactful with the dollars that you have wherever you're choosing to apply them. And bearing in mind that that means, you know, if you're looking at 17 million, 8.6 is for highest needs. That leaves, you know, 8 or 9 million for other areas, right? So I just wanted to put some numbers for us to kind of think about, you know, how far can this spread if we do broaden it out versus if we keep it a little bit more narrow for those higher needs and put the funds that way. And I'm actually not advocating for one way or the other. I'm trying to present both sides of those in ways that we can think about.
Thank you for saying that so much better than I could, but yes, that's very much what I was trying to say without advocating for any one thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Chair McCoy, this is Commissioner Parks. If I could make a comment. Commissioner Cummings, I appreciate your comments about comparing the Calavirus Green Map to what we're looking at today. And I have my binder here, thankfully. And so this commission did receive a presentation that had the Calavirus Green Map in July. And I was able to pull that out. And as I look at that, the map of 50 to 100%, so the broadest map matches what we saw in July most closely. And when I was looking at this information this morning, I was more in the camp of what you're describing, Commissioner Singh, like, let's be broad and that will give us more flexibility. But as I'm hearing this discussion tonight and thinking about, you know, what resources are available and really addressing the true highest needs neighborhoods first, it seems like prioritizing and being a little bit more confined and choosing perhaps the 25% threshold will help us do that. And then in 3 years, we'll be able to, you know, move on to other neighborhoods. So I'm still feeling a little bit conflicted because, you know, we want to see as many neighborhoods supported as possible, but there's only so much, so many resources available in a given year. And I'm feeling apt to be more targeted with those.
Thank you, Commissioner Parks. I agree 100% with you. I think with the 25% and then revisiting this back in 3 years will give us a better leeway. Thank you for bringing that up. Is there any other questions or comments for WRT on this item? So Christy, now do we have to decide which one we're going to use and recommend to the council, or do we just make a recommendation?
So if a commission member has a motion to recommend what was presented by WRT tonight as far as the factors and how they were weighted, and then a recommendation on the percentage, you know, the top 25 or 50%, to be included in that definition, then a commission member can make that motion. If there's a second, then you can vote on it, and majority will rule in this situation. And there can be more than one motion on the floor. So just because one commission member makes a motion, you can make a different motion if you so feel.
So I move that we accept WRT's factors as they've been presented to us tonight. And that we take the top 25% of the highest need neighborhoods as our cutoff point.
Vice Chair Dolan, motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it, Cummings.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
I think don't I have to take a call on every motion, Christy?
He can make a motion and then you can take a vote in the order the motions were made. So if the majority, if Mr. Barraza's motion is not the same as Mr. Dolan's, but Mr. Dolan receives a majority vote, then Mr. Barraza's is moot. at that point.
Go ahead, Commissioner Barraza.
The motion I would make that we select as the highest needs percentile from 51 to 100 for the top 50%.
Commissioner Barraza has made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I would like to make a motion.
Okay, Dr. Akuda.
I move that we accept WRT's recommendation and that we separately vote on the equity factors, the highest need, the second part. So my motion is that we accept WRT's recommendation for highest need.
Christy, can we do that? I think it was just a two-part presentation, but we have to motion and vote as a whole package, correct?
I think she might have frozen.
Is there any other city staff that might be able to answer that question on the call?
What was your question, Ms. McCoy?
So Dr. Akuda would like to make a motion to accept WRT's recommendation, but also would like a separate vote on the equity part.
Okay, 1 second.
Not saying it can't be done, Dr. Akuda, I just want to make sure.
Not a problem. You're doing your job, Madam Chair.
Okay, I got Christy on speaker. Go ahead, Christy.
Sorry, I lost internet access apparently. So the way that I understand the motions is we have, both motions are to accept the recommendations, that factors as presented by WRT. But one is to have the top 25% of the census tract considered versus 50%. So we could split it out, but I think that it's currently covered unless you wanted to
You're really breaking up really bad, Christy.
Considered.
Christy, you missed a third. You missed a third motion, and that's the motion in question. I moved that we simply accept WRT's. That's my motion, and hold off on the equities census part. And so the question is, can we? The question is.
Oh, sorry.
The question is, can we separate those two things out?
You can separate them out. Are you wanting to continue that percentage to another day, or are you still wanting to vote on it this evening?
Want to vote on it today, but vote on them separately.
Sure, you can make that motion.
And I have.
Okay.
I'll second that motion. This is Commissioner Parks.
So the way this would work is
Do I have a
motions in the order that they were made and seconded.
Thank you. Do we have any other motions on the table? Correct. So starting with Vice Chair Dolan's motion, Secretary, can you do roll call, please?
Yes, 1 second. I have Commissioner Parks.
I'm sorry, could you actually read it? Well, I guess I know what it is. Just for the sake of, so everybody knows what we're voting on, could you read the one we're voting on right now?
I think that's smart, yes.
Commissioner Dolan, do you want to repeat that? I have shorthand right now.
Yes, to accept WRT's proposal and to identify our focus on the top 25% of the highest need neighborhoods.
And that was seconded by Commissioner Cummings. Okay, so Commissioner Parks,
Yes.
Commissioner Barraza,
No.
Commissioner Singh,
No.
Commissioner Cummings,
I can't hear. Can you start over? I didn't hear. City Clerk, I couldn't hear. Excuse me, I couldn't hear all the votes. I couldn't hear Commissioner Parks say yes or no. Can you tell me what she said?
yes. So Commissioner Parks said, voted yes. Commissioner Barraza voted no. Commissioner Singh voted no.
Okay.
And Commissioner Cummings?
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Apuda?
No.
Commissioner Vane?
No.
Vice Chair Dolan?
Yes.
And Chair McCoy? Chair McCoy?
Yes.
Okay, so that passed 5-4.
Yes.
I have 6-3.
I have Commissioner Barraza voting no, Commissioner Singh
Yes.
voting no, Commissioner Apuda voting no, and Commissioner Vane voting no.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear Vane. Okay. Yeah, but it passes by a majority, which means that all of the other motions are moot.
Did you hear that, Commissioners?
So we
Yes,
don't take a
I
vote
heard it.
on the rest of the motions?
That is correct, because
That's
this
right.
one passed it, but majority vote.
Because the other ones are competing motions, so you can't pass all of them.
Okay, just trying to understand. Thank you. All right, so Vice Chair Dolan, no motion has passed. There will be a recommendation made to City Council to adopt the proposed highest needs definition as presented and start with the 25% town. And this meeting is adjourned at 7:57. Oh, one moment before I adjourn, I'm sorry. Commissioner Vane, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I just have a question for Mr. Gibbs. With a motion passing, the city council, can they come back and say, ask for the other recommendation too? Or do you just present what's been passed?
I would need to defer to city staff, Christie, or others for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. I heard you ask about it going to City Council.
Yeah, the reason why I asked is that, because when we look at the master plan and we look at the equity plan, some of the areas in the master plan does not match what we, for the 25%. That's why I voted the way I voted, because I went to look at the master plan. And some of the district needs of the highest needs that the constituent have voted or implemented.
Any of the other percentages.
Yeah. But anyways, all I wanted to know is that, is Mr. Gibb going to present the motion that's passed, or is he going to be providing all the information that he provided today to them? That's all I wanted to know.
It is the only thing that will be presented to City Council is the recommendation that was passed today by the commission. So it'll be the equity factors as presented by WRT with the top 25% recommendation.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barraza, you have your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on the question asked by Commissioner Vang. I think that because of such a close vote, the question is, can there be a minority report?
The The only thing that gets reported to city council are recommendations that have been made by the commission.
Right, so can there be a minority report?
So if you wanted to go before city council as an individual, as an individual in the community, you may do that. However, you cannot go before city council as a representative of the commission and provide something other than what the commission voted on to recommend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If we don't have any other questions, I will adjourn the meeting at 7:59. Thank you for your time.